by afternoon. Yeah, right now we are very, glad and very happy, and we are.
Professor, I'm sorry I interrupt. We also have Professor Omar from Malaysia.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
welcome.
Professor Dato. Yes.
Ahlan, Dato Prof.
Azmi
Umar
Umar.
Azmi Umar.
Waalaikumsalam. I will just follow the discussion without.
Okay, Prof. Thank you very much for you coming, even though it is in cyberspace. But one day we hope all you, the keynote speakers, will come directly to our campus by offline, not online. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
We are very honored to be, having keynote speakers from Durham University, and I don't know, I'm not sure, Prof. Umar Azmi from University of IUM or from where?
From INSAFE, Prof.
INSAFE. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. We are very happy. And this is, that we have Faculty of Economy. We say here Faculty of Economic and Business Islam. And Alhamdulillah, we have been visited by Professor Rifki Ismail. Maybe twice. Inshallah, Prof. Azmi and Prof. Mehmet. One day we have opportunity to be visited by this honorable professor, inshallah, and we have opportunity to have enlightenment from you all keynote speakers. Inshallah, our Faculty of Economy and Islamic Business, inshallah, can be upgraded in terms of the quality of academic and other things related to upgrading our Faculty of Economy. And I will not, prolong my speech. And inshallah, the times and place we are giving to the keynote speakers, inshallah, we try, that focus on the speech they delivered, inshallah. And once again, welcome, ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban, and thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Haji Ibrahim Siregar MCL, our rector of IAIN Padang Sidimpuan. Excellency, a speaker from United Kingdom, Professor Mehmet Asutai. Excellency, speaker from Malaysia, Professor Dato Dr. Azmi Umar. Brother and sister, our first speaker is Professor Mehmet Asutai. He is a professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Political Economy and Finance at the Durham University Business School, also director of the Durham Center in Islamic Economic and Finance, the director of Science, Master of Science in Islamic Finance programs. He have a very long curriculum vitae. I cannot read all, so that's all I can say. And for the additional information, he recently published a book with the title "A Model of Islamic Development." Also, in 2019, also mapping the risk and risk management practice in Islamic banking in 2019. And his most recent academic article in 2020 is Political Economy of Islamic Banking Growth, published in the International Journal of Finance and Economics. Also, he is the editor-in-chief of American Journal of Islam and Society and of the Review of Islamic Economics, and he is the honorary treasurer of the International Association of Islamic Economics. So Professor Mehmet Asutai will be our first speaker. And the second speaker will be Professor Dato Dr. Azmi Umar. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of International Center for Education in Islamic Finance in Sif, Malaysia. He is also the Director General of Islamic Research and Training Institute, IRTI, Islamic Development Bank, IDP Group, Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where he held the position for almost 6 years, and a senior professor and University Administrator at the International Islamic University, Malaysia for almost 30 years. So at IRTI, Professor Azmi pioneered and introduced many innovative policy research, which culminated into flagship reports such as IRTI Islamic Social Finance Report and IDB World Bank Global Report on Islamic Finance. Professor Azmi has also advised and provided technical assistance to a number of IDB member countries in their implementation of Islamic finance. He is a member of the External Advisory Group for the International Monetary Funds, IMF, Interdepartmental Work Committee on Islamic Finance, and Board of Trustees of Responsible Finance Institute, RFI Foundation. Professor Azmi was awarded the most outstanding individual contribution to Islamic finance in the KLIFF Islamic Finance Award 2015. He also served as the Islamic finance expert to the Authority Monetary Brunei Darussalam. He may be contacted at azmiomar@unsif.org. That's the short biography of Professor Dr. Dato Azmi Omar. So the next agenda, please to Professor Mehmet Asitai to deliver your presentation. You have time about 30 minutes, and then we have a questions and answer about 20 minutes. So the time is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me here for this forum. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And thank you very much for Professor Segar for the introduction. I'm pleased to share this platform with Professor Azmi Omar. And of course, my thanks also to Dr. Rifki Ismail, one of the greatest friends we have as greatest ambassador of our program. It is good to be here to discuss Islamic economics and finance related matters. There are, of course, a very large agenda, but I will try to, benefiting that mostly we have students here, just want to reflect on some theoretical issues, but at the same time, aim at to discuss some of the issues that we face in Islamic finance and how Islamic finance turn can be managed in to deliver certain results that we are expecting. In other words, looking at the Islamic moral economy as a framework for Islamic finance to enhance development, because the objective of this conference is to look into how Islamic economic contribution can be achieved in the future. And when we look at, of course, the main institution of Islamic economics that we have around us as Islamic finance, Islamic banks and financial institutions. As Dr. Azmi, later Professor Azmi will be discussing, he will look into social finance. So that's the second sphere we have, which have become more prominent in the discussion of delivery of development in recent years in the face of Islamic banking and finance not being able to fulfill such expectations. Of course, when we raise such issues, we are reminded that Islamic banks and financial institutions are private institutions, and therefore expecting delivery of development-related economic contribution is futile. However, while I understand the institutional logic of Islamic banks, also private banks are commercial banks, but the Islamic turn in Islamic banking and finance requires certain outcomes, and there are certain expectations associated with such institutions. And therefore, our expectation is that these institutions, Islamic banks and financial institutions, should contribute to the economy beyond just economic growth, but larger economic and development issues and economic well-being of people, but beyond perhaps the welfare issues in the Muslim world. not only allocating this area to Islamic social finance, which is important, but at the same time, we need to develop structured responses to development issues through financial institutions, including banks. And therefore, by saying that, of course, I'm identifying that despite being commercial banks, the religious logic, in addition to commercial logic, is something that we have to consider as an important caveat and constraint on Islamic banking. In other words, we cannot just accept the fact that, look, these are commercial institutions based on the institutional logic of banking as commercial bank, as part of the capitalism. But the whole ontological base and the normative base of Islamic banking requires certain qualities to be delivered, because that's the rational for existence of Islamic banking and finance. And therefore, not only considering that these institutions have to work in the same way as other banks, does not solve the problem of initiating Islamic banking with an institutional logic of Islam. And therefore, we need to see how in the next round, in the next generation of Islamic banking, can contribute to larger development-related issues, and that's essential. Because when we look at the first model of Islamic banking, 1960s in mid-Qamr, was very much a social bank, social credit bank, which aimed at empowering individual and community. However, in the second round, the option has been, or the model that has been followed, which is around us, is the commercial logic. And therefore, in the third round of emergence, of course, we have seen the emergence of new financial institutions, from crowdfunding to fintechs and all those newly emerging institutional forms. However, I would stress that we have to look into innovate institutions within the finance realm, which can fit into the expectations of Islamic moral economy. And that is because, as we have seen with the COVID case around us as well, the major problem that we face as crisis, and crisis that is generated by capitalism, is not stopping here. Either you have financial crisis, environmental crisis, health crisis, and these are global crises. In order to be able to respond to such crisis, we need to have perhaps innovative institutions as well as innovative tools to respond effectively to the emerging crisis around us. And in particular with the COVID, what we have seen, the whole idea that self-maximizing individual is not working. As we can see, you cannot just suggest that I'm self-maximizing, I'm okay, the COVID is not going to affect me. On the contrary, the COVID has demonstrated that individual utility function can only be achieved or can be maximized only when other people are healthy and well. In other words, if other people are not healthy and well, I won't be healthy and happy either. And that directly suggests the whole stoicism idea of the capitalist economy is not working. And therefore what we have seen, not only in Muslim countries, but all over the world, people started this solidarity economy, supporting one another in the face of the challenges, economic, financial challenges of this global health problem that we have all witnessed. And therefore, the new definitions are in front of us. We cannot escape anymore, because in the emergence of Islamic banking and finance in the form of commercial banking, unfortunately, the definitions were not made. The conceptual definitions were not made, and therefore the model was Islamized. However, we had to fit into the Islamic banking and finance, had to fit into the existing institutional logic of capitalist economy and the market system, and therefore the expectations that Islamic banks and finance should work within certain Islamic normative structures has not been fulfilled. And that brings us to definition issues, that those definitions now has to be made in order to look into how the Islamic banking and finance turn in the new generation of emergence can respond to the realistic issues on the ground on the one hand, and on the other hand, authentically can fulfill certain expectations that Islam as a worldview expects from such institutions. And therefore, the importance of redefinition which have not been done. So the new generation of Islamic economics and bankers, of the researchers and students, we should be able to involve now in more realistically looking into how such definitions can be done. In other words, are we just suggesting that riba prohibition is there just to instrumentalize it in different structures, but produce the same outcomes as conventional banks or financial institutions? Or riba prohibition suggests something different, suggests that capital, the domination of capital should be brought down to the same level with other stakeholders, so that a different political economy can emerge out of there. And in that political economy, the whole objective of falah, the individual salvation in this world and hereafter, through the socializing individual ihsan, how ihsan can be essentialized in order to develop a different political economy, a solidarity economy is important. Therefore, perhaps as part of this new definition, rather than confining ourselves with the definition of economics in terms of maximizing an efficiency, perhaps Islamic normative consequences of iqtisad, our economics, in terms of establishing equity, balance, and equilibrium is important. Having said that, of course, I accept the fact that in recent years, we have been discussing a lot on social finance, Islamic social finance, to fulfill such objectives. However, that will be very much the replication of the existing structures again. In other words, shifting the burden of development to the generosity of people, as well as, of course, structured zakat and waqf. But I think beyond that, we have to look into the entire economy, how this whole normative economics of Islam can produce certain outcomes that can contribute to the betterment of lives in the economies. In other words, rather than having a very dichotomous economies of the Islamic social finance on the one hand, and then Islamic banking and finance on the other, we have to look into how this can be brought together under the Islamic political economy to produce outcomes according to expectations that we have within the Islamic normativeness. And therefore, rather than looking into banking and finance, their operations, the prohibitions related finance, rather than just considering them as in an instrumentalized manner, developing certain structures, financing structures, producing similar ends as Islamic conventional banks and financial institutions, we have to locate such prohibitions, such instruments of Islamic finance within the normative understanding, within a larger perspective and broader expectations to be able to respond to the problems that we have around us. In other words, are we doing the same thing but using different instrumentalization process, or are we producing entirely different consequences as well with very authentic ways of looking at economy and finance is reality? And therefore, we cannot just consider that Islam's prohibition of riba and the permission about private ownership as being separate from other parts of the general plan of Islamic economy in terms of expectations. And therefore, it has to be located. We must understand that such expectations, as well as the instruments and institutions, have to be located within the larger expectations of Islam, Islamic system, the cognitive system, as well as the institutional expectations. And therefore, social, political, and other expectations have to be linked with prohibition of riba and the Islamic banking and finance to be able to produce expectations that we have. In other words, Islamic economy, therefore, is a part of a general system of Islam, the cognitive system of Islam, as well as the historical practice, certain historical practices, and therefore it cannot be divorced from those expectations and the general system of Islam. And that is very much the reality that we have around us. In other words, when we look at the realities that is surrounding us with the impact of COVID, of course, currently, but generally as well, being in developing countries such as Indonesia, but all over the world, we have the realities that the capitalist domination, unfortunately, through capital, holding capital and accumulation of capital results in a domination, as can be seen in this photograph from the social media. So one, accessibility is a problem, that people cannot have accessibility to the available resources around us. And then certain people have the domination and controls the entire accessibility. And of course, developing an equality-based understanding would not solve the problem, because when you distribute the same amount to everyone, unfortunately, you may not be able to solve the problem. And therefore, it is essential that a justice-oriented understanding, as we suggest within the normative principles of Islamic moral economy, looking at the individual needs and responding to those needs so that accessibility can be achieved and domination can be stopped, so that a more peaceful society can be achieved. The reality even around us, wherever we go in the world, not only developing countries, but in very developed countries, you have people starting from minus, not only on the zero level, but minus, they start their lives. We can see that with the increased debt that is going around us, individual household debts, as well as the public debt, is creating this negativity, people starting their life with a negative base. And in the face of that, on the other hand, you see huge dominations, is enormous wealth in one company, which can be equal to GDPs of a number of countries in the world. And in micro as well as the macro level, in order to be able to therefore overcome this problem, we have to look into how equity-based structures therefore can be established so that the accessibility problem can be solved and wealth can be distributed in such a way to establish peace in societies. Because our objective is to establish peace, and a peaceful environment will facilitate the emergence and the sustainability of the Islamic objectives. And also it is an Islamic objective that the Islamic economic activity has to look into how to empower individuals, but importantly, how to emancipate individuals. And therefore, such as in these photographs, we have to be able to emancipate individuals in the negative, and then we have to empower them so that they can have accessibility. And this challenge remains an important challenge in front of us within the Islamic circles, whether we are dealing with Islamic finance or not. But this remains, on the one hand, a reality in Muslim societies. On the other hand, it is a challenge for Islamic economics and finance how to achieve such a stable society in which certain level of quality of welfare is achieved and the accessibility is provided. And that has a lot of consequences for Islamic economics in terms of development objectives, because Islam as well considered that the resources that we have around us created by Allah for everyone. And therefore, when we talk about private property, we cannot consider that private property in the same way as capitalism is considering, but it has different connotations, and that different connotation and different modeling has to emerge in order to be able to solve the problems that we have around us. Because at the end of the day, the emergence of Islamic economics in modern times as a movement, it was very much the problematization of the resource accessibility, the development of Muslim societies. When we look at the discourse in late 1960s in Malaysia, but before that 1950s in Pakistan and Southeast Asia, it is very much the development of societies, empowering individuals was the heart of the debate in the emergence according to the authenticity of Islamic normative. And therefore how accessibility can be provided by removing the barriers from the resources that is created by Allah for everyone to have access and to enjoy. So on the one hand, yes, equity structures are important for us to develop, and that is very much how Islamic finance can help us. But on the other hand, as an economic, as a political economy consequence, we have to ensure how we can develop structures and Islamic political economy strategies to enable people, like on the right-hand side, and part of the photograph in front of us, how people can have accessibility to resources by beyond the barriers imposed. So on the one hand, therefore, as a short-term solution, equity structures can be developed to respond to the problems we have around us. However, in the long run, therefore, we have to look into how resources can be made available for people, removing the barriers, preventing people to have those accessibilities. And therefore, the justice, that is the core of Islamic economics understanding. Islamic moral economy essentializes, as Quran generally essentializes justice, but that is an important objective of Islamic moral economy, how that can be achieved through making the resources available for people, which were created, of course, for people to have accessibilities. In other words, bringing the Islamic logic into the entire debate and policy making, rather than using Islam as a layer to correct the consequences of capitalist economy. That is what I am arguing here. In other words, you have to structurally solve the problem first, and then whatever the additional problem remains, we can attempt to solve with our traditional institutions such as zakat, and Waqf and other institutions, but the structural response is very much important in reconstituting a political economy in the Muslim world, so that the resource accessibilities can be possible to prevent poverty, for instance, but develop a structure in which resources are equally available for everyone, and hence peace, a society of peace, but a society of political, social, and economic stability is essential. And therefore, when we look at the emergence of Islamic economics and finance, is very much such responses to develop a structural response, rather than just moving capital from A to B, and whether that is halal. So that's a very partial question. And Islamic economics, when it emerged, it criticized the conventional economics for being very partial in terms of responding to the problems that we have around us. In other words, our problem is not only how can moving capital from A to B and whether that is halal or not, but at the same time, what consequences such capital movement produces is an important issue. What consequences? How are we going to empower individuals by moving capital from A to B? That is an important question that we have to raise, and that has been the core question in the heart of Islamic economic movement since the emergence in 1950s in the post-colonial period. And therefore, when we look at the discourse of the founding fathers, very much they wanted to develop this normative understanding of economics based on Islamic norms with the objective of considering how the well-being of the state, all the stakeholders can be achieved, because in their discourse, they heavily criticize capitalism and socialism for failing that. And therefore, rather than repeating the same, but just changing the instruments of doing that, moving capital from A to B, but just minus the riba does not produce the outcomes that we are expecting. So those outcomes, therefore, has to be considered how we can authentically develop such structures so that such expectations can be fulfilled. And therefore, in the emergence, what we see a counter-hegemony. In other words, developing a political economy as a counter-hegemony to respond to the in a structural manner to the failures of the existing systems, and therefore creating a different order based on Islamic understanding. Of course, that's a very much at the same time a political project, and therefore it may not be as easy possible. But at least in the civil society, and at least by providing a new turn to the an Islamic logic to existing institutions such as Islamic banks is an important progress. It could be an important progress which can help us to fulfill the human-centric development strategy and extended stakeholder governance as expected from the normative constitution of Islamic economy. In other words, the Islamic economic movement is novel, and it's very much important, and it fits into the post-1960s discourse on rescuing human, land, environment, labor, and even capital from the chains of the existing structures by essentializing an embedded economy, embedded in the value system of Islam, which essentializes the emancipation of individual and empowerment of those individuals. And therefore, we have to see how we can locate Islamic finance in such a ways. And therefore, Islamic finance cannot be just as an instrument of moving capital from one place to another, but is attached to certain normativeness, okay? And so far, when we look at Islamic finance, of course, certain transactional successes. In other words, we proudly happy to see that the transactional base has increased through Islamic finance. We are talking about 3 trillions or more, have $3 trillion US since 1980s, how Islamic finance, despite the political barriers it has faced, it has managed to mobilize certain resources in the economy. However, we have to look at not only transactional success in terms of capital accumulation, but importantly, how Islamic finance can contribute to the transformation of societies, how those capital accumulation can lead to certain positive consequences in everyone's life. And therefore, we cannot just instrumentalize, we cannot just accept as an end of history discourse of Islamic finance. That's this faqih treatment, moving capital from one place to another. As long as it is halal, it fulfills Sharia compliancy, then that should be enough. No, that's not enough. That is only an instrument, but we have to attach that to certain consequences. And therefore, the debate that we have around this forms versus substance remains an important debate, and it continues, which brings criticism to the operation of Islamic finance. But it is very much the moral economic turn that we are expecting in Islamic finance, to produce certain consequences. And that turned very much in the essence of the non-fiqhi approach, the substantive approach to Islamic economics and finance, because Islamic finance within such broader understanding is very much aimed at the centering capital to essentialize the transformation of societies within its discourse and the value system. And therefore, as part of that, rather than generating a debt-based economy and continue the hegemony of capital over people and financialize the societies, the whole objective is to develop structures in which equity is important and financialization is overcome. And therefore, certain equity-based structures within Islamic finance, how it becomes essential in order to fulfill such expectations. Because the way Islamic finance is developing, unfortunately, fictitious commodities and commodification is becoming an important channel for gaining wealth. But of course, the Islamic position on such matters, such as fictitious commodities, commodification, is not accepted within the Islamic political economy. And therefore, within such an understanding, the social responsibility and development consequences cannot only be reduced to or relegated to charity or zakat and waqf, but we have to develop a structural political economy response in reshaping new institutions, be innovative in our thinking, how Islamic logic can be essentialized in the process. And therefore, how stakeholding and governance model can be developed rather than unfortunate case of shareholding interest-based Islamic commercial banking and democratization of Islamic finance through new structures with the objective of inclusive development and growth should be considered. Of course, SDGs and ESGs are important, but these are only there to moderate the consequences of the existing system. So such structures can be useful in the short run, but in the long run, a structural turn is necessary to be able to respond to the development issues that we have around us. And therefore, when we look at in terms of problematization, unfortunately, this data is not updated, but we can see that Islamic finance in its operation, rather than developing such structured response to the problems that we have around us, following the same trajectory of development of conventional finance and therefore heavily moving to the financial sphere rather than being located in the production sphere as it was expected. Hence, a real financialization trajectory is emerging Islamic finance. And when we look at, of course, for instance, sectoral financing extended by Islamic banking institutions, thank you to Nurdani for updating the data for this, if she's watching us. When we look at, unfortunately, Islamic banks and financial institutions essentializing certain sectors, which of course does not necessarily give us confidence that the economic contribution of Islamic finance can be possible or is possible, and whether can that turn be achieved. Because when we look at heavy creating debted individuals through the consumer durables, financing, banking and financial sectors, as well as the real estate sectors are the three sectors are emerging sectors which grab the larger amount of funds from Islamic banks, banking institutions. And that, of course, gives us the impression that Islamic banking and finance perhaps is not directly contributing to economic development in terms of, for instance, creating jobs, creating value added, but rather follows the same trajectory of the institutional logic of conventional banks and heavily, unfortunately, moves into certain sectors that are not necessarily creating value added, such as banking and finance, such as real estate, as well as the consumer durables. And that is unfortunately visible in the case of Indonesia. Indonesian model is very dear to me as a political economist, because the initial model of civil society-based Islamic finance in Indonesia is very much essential in terms of delivering development expectations. And therefore that civil society-based Islamic finance quality as a model, as a distinction of Indonesian model, I hope we are not going to see it disappearing, despite the fact that in recent years, the whole attempt to develop Islamic finance. I think in terms of economic contribution, in terms of development of individual and society, the civil society nature, starting from BMTs and going into other structures, has been the strongest part of the Indonesian sphere of Islamic finance and Islamic normativeness in terms of economics and finance, and hope that that will continue. But as can be seen in this picture, as well as in the case of other countries, time is an issue, therefore I didn't include the other countries. What we see in terms of contributing to the larger economic development issues, most of the financing from Islamic banks goes to the certain sectors, which does not necessarily contribute to the value added, but on the contrary, creates the indebted man and woman in our societies. And therefore, in order to look into what financing natures as well are used in terms of the particular structures, whether it's the fixed income or the equity structures, what we see, of course, very much the murabaha-based, ijara-based structures. Of course, in recent years, under the other categories which are not disclosed, commodity murabaha and tawarruk is becoming, organized tawarruk is becoming hegemonic. In other words, again, rather than using structures which can produce development, the structures that we have around us are very much, again, debt-based, as well as it goes in line with the sectoral distribution to provide financing to certain sectors which does not have. Unfortunately, I couldn't update that data, but again, this is the Malaysian reality between 2014 and 2016. We can see that how tawarruk has become so dominant and replacing most of the financing. And in 3 years' time, it has increased by 104%, which of course creates an entirely debt-based economy, which unfortunately creates further financialization and could easily undermine, like the conventional finance, by creating that the financial stability in the economy. Again, when we look at whether the Islamic finance makes financial markets or the economy stronger, unfortunately, because of the size issue, we have to accept, of course, Islamic finance is still small, but unfortunately, it doesn't give the necessary strength that we expect from Islamic finance to contribute. And these are because, again, it comes to the what I have been identifying in the beginning, our imagination of Islamic finance. Because the entire imagination is very much related to capital movement in the same sense as the institutional logic of capitalism, unfortunately, similar results are being produced. And therefore, a moral economic turn, how the Islamic religious logic can produce in a substantive manner institutions as well as consequences, remains to be an important question for us. And therefore, when we look at here, the chronic crisis, as I mentioned, around us, macroeconomic imbalances that we face all over the world, and therefore the huge need for alternative systems, institutions, and practices is essential for us to consider. While Islamic finance is considered to provide that alternativeness, but unfortunately, it remains, in terms of the consequences, it remains in the same page with conventional. And therefore, we have to look into how we can redefine Islamic finance to produce certain outcomes that we expect. For instance, from this photograph that you can see, the art of protecting and financing people. I am yet to see an Islamic bank developing such a logo or the motto to suggest that their vision is very much the art of protecting and financing people. But I could see that in a conventional institution when I was walking around in Brussels. I saw this in front of a large financial institution as their slogan. And I was very much taken by that it's pity that Islamic finance and Islamic banking and financial institutions wouldn't develop such slogans even at that level in terms of their mission and vision. And therefore, rather than heavily essentializing on financial finance, as the since 1990s, we have been told that the financial development will bring economic growth, but no one, of course, talks about whether financial development would bring economic development. And that is very much related how we understand finance. And as Schiller would say that finance is not about making money. It's a functional science that exists to support other goals. What are those goals? The goals of the society. And therefore, it should not be a zero-sum game, but rather an adjunct to a means and towards a productive life. And this is not an Islamic economics telling you, but it is Schiller, Nobel Prize winner, and tells you that finance has to be linked to certain societal objective. And that is very much when you look at Chopra, for instance, one of the founding fathers of Islamic economics, he would essentialize the goal. How whatever we do has to relate to a goal. And that goal is very much the liberation of individuals, the emancipation and empowerment of individual. And therefore, it is important that we should be able to look into how that good society that we are looking in terms of establishing equilibrium between different stakeholders and their interests, and develop that good society that Schiller refers to in terms of objective function, and have individuals as falah individuals looking for their falah in this world and hereafter, with ihsan, the beneficence, expanding that as an important factor. And that, of course, requires the centering finance with reaching certain objectives, and with the objective, of course, the human development of all the stakeholders, and importantly, responding in political economy, understanding of modes of production. That would therefore require us to redefine what is capital, what is labor, what is land. So such definitions now, in particular with the emergence of new generation, in all these programs that emerge on Islamic economics and finance, such redefinitions have to be done so that we can produce certain outcomes in the process. Outcomes that fit into the expectation of Islamic normativeness in terms of emancipation, empowerment, and individual falah and societal ihsan. So therefore, finance is not the ultimate objective, but how finance can be linked to the larger objectives. And therefore, when we look at the ontological ways of developing some normative framework for ourselves, what we look into, the Islamic understanding suggests, the Islamic normative values suggest that whatever we have around us is a privilege rather than right, because the banking logic is based on right understanding. However, the Islamic moral economy and Islamic normativeness suggests a privilege-based understanding. So whatever we have around us is a privilege, and therefore we have to work within that privilege of developing a particular solidarity economy and the sharing economy, and that is the consequence that is expected from us by maximizing ihsan in the society to be able to overcome the domination of one particular modes of production, that is capital. And we have to treat all the factors of production very much in the same way, considering their places in the economy. And that is very much a very political economy approach, because every political economy, every civilization has particular worldview, and that worldview is expected to produce a particular social formation, and that social formation is expected to lead a certain system, including economic, political, social system, and that is very much the order. In the case of Islam as well, that is the case, and how therefore Islamic economic system is part of that Islamic normative based Islamic order, and how therefore modes of production, Islamic modes of production, Islamic value theory, and Islamic distribution theory therefore is part of that particular ontological understanding how the society can be organized around the resources. And that will require, of course, defining what is the modes of production, what is labor, capital, and their relationship, and who is capitalist, who owns what, how long, and etc. Such redefinitions has to be made. I mean, I'm just essentializing such matters because I can see that a lot of students are here today with us, and we have to provide them a new imagination. And that new imagination requires, therefore, going beyond the mimicking process of Islamizing what structures we have, but at the same time, how we can develop new understanding and new imagination based on a certain understanding. And that is the Islamic normativeness here, as we can see. So those definitions have to be done in order to be able to reach an understanding how we can make a difference in our societies, rather than just forcing ourselves, constraining ourselves with moving capital, and whether moving capital is halal or not. But what is most important, yes, the movement of capital has to be halal, but the consequences that we produce by moving capital has to be halal as well. So therefore, the tafid requires that you cannot just look at the process, you have to look at the consequence at the same time. And therefore, the moral economy is important for us to consider in terms of embeddedness, how the economic and financial activities that we have, the transactions that we have to be embedded into the value system of Islam in terms of process, Sharia compliancy, but in terms of consequences that it produces as well. That distinction that is made in Islamic finance, just looking at the Sharia compliancy by forgetting the consequence, is not acceptable in terms of the value proposition that we are suggesting through Islamic economic movement. Therefore, we are talking about embeddedness as an essential quality that economy has to be result and the product of Islamic normativeness, and that requires very much collective action, as we can see in the COVID case, as well as in the organization of societies to produce certain development outcomes. And the real economy, therefore, is important, and therefore I shared those graphs with you to show that how Islamic finance moving away from real economy by focusing very much on the real estate, banking and finance-based financing, as well as consumer durables. The essentialization of community is again as part of this embeddedness as essential quality Islamic political economy essentializes. The reciprocity, the coordination, the commodification of whatever we have around us, as in those pictures, people have accessibility problem to resources because everything has been commodified around us. And therefore, as very much Islamic moral economy movement aims at to commodify and as well to prevent fictitiousness in the process. As we can see how in organized tawarruk, fictitious transactions are taking place, which has become dominant. However, Islamic position in terms of fiqh, and strangely, but at the same time, in terms of moral economy and political economy, aims at the fictitiousness. And therefore, it is not the prices in our understanding in this political economy, Islamic political economy, it is not the prices that determine everything. No, because of the embeddedness, everything that determines prices. In other words, you are changing the equations to produce a different ways of looking at. And therefore, the importance of the whole redefinition of whether Islamic economics or iqtisad, because when we look at iqtisad, what we see in terms of the roots of Arabic term, either it means qasd, which is the directing towards an objective, through path, or in line with an aim, equable and temporal. As you can see, it suggests a different political economy. Again, another root of iqtisad comes from qist, which implies just share and justice. And therefore, our imagination now with iqtisad, of course, moves entirely from efficiency of capital and maximizing of profit, utilities, and etc., to a different worldview. In this worldview, you are essentializing justice, you are essentializing directing towards an objective, giving right of everything, the right of everything, and therefore all the stakeholders' right has to be considered and locating everything in its place. And so therefore, a different imagination here that we are talking, and how we can provide that turn in our societies, in particular, the new generation that we have around us, who has exposure now to Islamic economics and finance related education. And therefore we have to provide that responsibility of providing students with a larger objective as well, how they can start to think about new imaginations to move to better circumstances. And therefore Islamic moral economy is very much individual falah, but achieving ihsan in the society with the very much the development strategy with a constructivist understanding how to change behavioral norms of individuals so that the whole normative worldview of Islam can be achieved as a result. And this is a full a proposal or proposition in terms of developing a paradigm. And therefore, at the core of this, you have Islamic moral economy, and it is Islamic moral economy is very much based on the normative expression of Islam, and therefore at the core of that we have Tawheed. And Tawheed has important implications for this political economy because it suggests that, for instance, with the prohibition of riba, what's the implication of Tawheed? It implies that all the stakeholders, whatever we have around us as part of these privileges created by Allah, and therefore accessibility has to be there, and therefore there cannot be any domination. And therefore, in this structure, in this political economic structures, such as capital cannot be dominant, neither labor can be dominant. And therefore, in the sight of Allah, everything has to be horizontally equal, and therefore we have to overcome the domination. And prohibition of riba by preventing expropriation, therefore, aims at establishing that equality between different stakeholders by preventing the domination of capital. So as we can see with the new definitions, looking at the authentic meaning of definitions, rather than just instrumentalizing through the Islamization process, what we see a different political economy emerging. Because your objective is to achieve adala, the justice in the society as we have discussed, but that's not enough. When justice cannot deliver, then ihsan comes an important equilibrium instrument for us. Naqvi's fantastic definition, enlightening definition of ihsan, in order to establish equilibrium in the society when justice is not enough to deliver deliberate development, ihsan comes into picture to establish that equilibrium in the society so that those who have whatever they have can share with others to bring the others to the similar level. And that can be possible with the tazkiyah process, considering that one's growth individually or company or whatever cannot be at the expense of the others. And therefore the interest of all stakeholders have to be considered in an equal manner in the process. Why? Because with the Rububiyyah, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything with perfection as a fitra, and therefore their objective is to reach to that perfection, and therefore sustainability of all the resources, including human sustainability, is in the face of all this human insecurity that we have around us, but environmental, again, development and the progress, and as well as other stakeholders is important for us to consider. Why? Because as part of that privilege, whatever the resources we have around us is a trust for us from Allah, and therefore everything has to be given an opportunity to develop as they are set to develop. And in order to overcome the social interest and the private interest dilemma, therefore we see that such as zakat as a structure was important as a mandatory instrument. But in that, of course, again, the definition of zakat is very much important for us. Zakat is not an exogenous variable in this equation, but rather it's part of the modes of production, recognizing the right of the society in our production function, so that whatever the resources created by Allah for the entire communities and societies to enjoy, but with the privatizing those areas, you are excluding people to have access. Therefore, in the modes of production, in the production function, you have to recognize the right of society, and therefore it is not a charity. It is a dynamic model of production equation, and how zakat therefore directly is a product of that process. Why? Because individuals have to fulfill those responsibilities as the vicegerent of Allah on earth, and because all the stakeholders' rights have to be considered, so that we can develop a solidarity-based society with the objective of course, with the methodological understanding of Maqasid al-Sharia, which is interpreted human well-being. So whatever we do, economic and financial transaction, it has to produce such consequences which essentializes the well-being of all stakeholders in the process according to Maqasid al-Sharia. And therefore, it is not only intention as has been done in Islamic finance, but the consequences have to be Islamic as well, as the Maqasid al-Sharia tells us. And therefore, developing a proactive understanding of Maqasid rather than static understanding, but developing a dynamic understanding considering development rather than safeguarding is an essential redefinition of Maqasid al-Sharia as well, rather than the traditional Maqasid al-Sharia definition that we have, which is based on entirely a static understanding. And therefore, within this tawhidi framework of Islamic moral economy, the whole objective is responding to development as the 1970s discourse aimed at. With that, developing a counter hegemony against the existing system, with the objective of very much human-centered development by empowering individual, by producing results which functions individual, which enables individuals to become being individuals with the objective of developing the behavioral norms of individuals with certain qualities so that certain outcomes can be expected to be produced. And the time is an issue, so I'm going to pass most of these issues, but these are important issues for us to consider, that the Islamic morality in a substantive manner, not as an instrumental manner, without instrumentalizing it, has to be produced certain outcomes that is acceptable. So it is not only this form, that's the Sharia compliancy, but the substance, how that can be essentialized to produce structures which can respond to our problems that we have. The moral purpose, the objective of societies has to be taken into account in the wealth creation so that we can prevent the oppressive exploitation, ecological imbalances, environmental disruptions by essentializing and development-centered understanding through looking at how new structures through cooperations beyond the market mechanisms can be achieved to develop a particular Islamic moral economy. And therefore, whether we talk about elimination of poverty, establishing a society with freedoms and free from corruptions, reduction of economic disparities and social justice with an interest-free system, and institutionalization of zakat and sustainable development. By considering moral and ethical instruments, we have to develop new structures rather than considering each one of them as an instrumentalized understanding. As SDGs are exciting project, but again, it instrumentalizes because it doesn't ask the core question, does not question why we have the capital domination. With SDGs, as I mentioned, is an exciting project, but it only asks the capital dominated political economy to give for the betterment of society. It doesn't ask to change the equation rather than solving the problem at the heart. And therefore the embedded society is an essential quality that we are aiming to reach through an Islamic political economy perspective. And with that, of course,
Professor Mehmet,
the objective is to, yes.
Professor?
Okay,
Okay.
I'll be finishing.
Okay, thank you.
I'm finishing. Okay, and therefore a sharing economy and a collaborative economy with the objective of therefore developing an institutional emergence for authentic institutions through the value system of Islam, how that value system Islam can be converted into norms, and through that we can do the redefinition through the roles and develop new authentic institutions as can be seen in this graph. And therefore, we have to look into moving into a new realm, perhaps to look into, in particular with you individual students, being the new generation of those societies, how therefore we can create an embedded economy to respond to the problems that we are facing. Of course, we have huge problems in front of us, and therefore we have to respond. And at the same time, we have to look into how, for instance, a new turn can be provided for the Islamic finance that we have around us. The long-term objectives, because we have now Dr. Rifki is here with us as well. He's moving into standard-related institution, IFSP. We have to look into, rather than having such standard-bearing institutions forcing Islamic finance to be more fitting into the market economy in a grafting process, because our institutions are being grafted currently. So we have to look into how the regulative environment, standard developing institutions provide new opportunity spaces for Islamic finance to develop itself within its own normative understanding. And so how that new ways of looking at the reality through different institutional forms, rather than squeezing Islamic finance and Islamic banking further into the market system, has to be considered. So the policy making as well has to develop and look into such issues so that the transformational nature of Islamic political economy can be achieved. But in the short run, therefore, how Islamic finance turn within moral economy can look into direct investment, participation investment, equity-based structures, ethical underpinnings, financing the unbankable, contributing economic, social, human, as well as environmental development, impact investment, and real economic activity is important. And therefore, as Professor Azmi will be talking, the importance of Islamic social finance in the short run, again, responding problems, but at the same time, how Islamic finance can be motivated and incentivized for SMEs financing, agriculture, and manufacturing financing is important. How Islamic banks and perhaps states can develop development funds to respond to issues, Islamic social banking, crowdfunding, the Waqf, Zakat, Islamic charities, Islamic microfinance, and other structures can be considered in the short run to respond to the emerging problems that we have around us. In other words, Islamic finance is an amazing story. It's an emerging story. It is an amazing story, but it is shaped without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Therefore, our objective is to provide a substantive shape and provide the necessary color and get this force not to be paralyzed, but dynamically respond to the problems that we have around us, and therefore develop this motion, okay, not only gesture, but developing the motion to respond to the problems that we have by creating new imaginations, saying new things, how therefore the political economy and moral economy approach can be developed to respond in a structural manner to the problems that we have around us. Thank you very much, and my apologies for the time. And if there are questions, I'm happy to respond. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to new generation of Islamic economics and banking and finance students to discuss and develop new imaginations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Mehmet. Would you mind if Professor Omar presents his presentation?
Yes.
And after that we discuss? Okay.
Certainly.
Thank you, Professor. Please.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Professor Omar. Are you there, Professor?
Yes. Hold on. Are you able to see my slide?
Yes, Professor, but your face is blue. I don't know what happened to your background, virtual background. We cannot see your face.
Let me see. Let me see. What happened?
The virtual background.
Yeah, the one that you sent it to me, I was not able to use it partly because I use Mac. MacBook Air. MacBook Air cannot handle the background screen.
Okay.
Let me see. Now it's not showing.
No, we can see your presentation, Professor Azmi.
Yeah, but I cannot see myself in the screen.
Okay, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem. Let me see first. Let me see. But anyway.
Perhaps Professor Azmi, sorry to interrupt. Rather than having a slideshow, if you keep the slides, sometimes Mac does that problem. Stop the slideshow, then you should be okay. Sometimes Mac does that.
Not using the slideshow, eh?
Yes.
If this one, no.
So this is slideshow. Okay.
I'm not using the slideshow, but anyway, it doesn't show. I think in the interest of time, let me just start the discussion. Let me start the discussion. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. First, let me thank Ms. Rodami, the moderator, Professor Mehmet Asuti, conference participants, and Dr. Rifki and the others, brothers and sisters, students. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. First, let me thank the Institute Agama Islam Negeri Padang Simpuan, Padang Sidimpuan, yes, for organizing. To me, this is very unique because this is the first time ever that you are organizing the first international conference on Islamic economics and social finance. And I see this, that's a show of commitment by Indonesian universities, both at the university level, faculty members, as well as students, to deepen the knowledge on Islamic economics as well as Islamic finance. I mean, having worked in Indonesia through many years, I think I started my teaching as a visiting professor in Indonesia from 1997. It's a long time ago. My involvement in Islamic finance started in 1985. So it has been quite a long involvement in Islamic finance, both in the context of banking, takaful, capital market, as well as advisory. So I've seen a great development in Islamic finance, Islamic economics in Indonesia. And to a certain extent, I was involved in the development of the Sharia Economy Master Plan for Indonesia, where I see the potential to bring Islamic economy further in Indonesia. I think the topic that I've been asked to look at is what we call it, the topic on Islamic Islamic social finance. So what I did is that I'm trying to look at the importance of having impact indicators for Islamic social finance and to learn the lessons from impact investment. I mean, but a lot of people have been talking about, Islamic social finance. Nowadays, it's a very, I would say, flavor of the month. People are talking globally, both in Indonesia, Malaysia, and in many other places, because after having discussed Islamic economics, Islamic finance, capital market, takaful, and so on, and I see Islamic social finance is an important area. For example, before COVID-19, I used to go to Brunei every month. I'm the advisor to the Central Bank of Brunei in developing Islamic finance, including Islamic social finance. And even Brunei, as you can see, the country has one of the highest GDP in the world per capita, but at the same time, they are really interested to push the Islamic social finance further, particularly to address those people who are poor in Brunei, as well as to address the SME needs. And this is part of the thing that was discussed earlier on by Professor Mehmet. So after talking a bit about Islamic social finance, I'll be looking about just one slide on issues in Islamic social finance, and then briefly on impact investment, the spectrum of impact investing, the Sharia compliant investment and impact investment. This one I would draw upon my experience. I am also in the Sharia committee, although I am not a Sharia person per se, but I am involved in Sharia committee of Islamic Bank in Malaysia, of a takaful company, as well as Sharia committee at the Securities Commission. That is the regulator, quite similar to your OJK, regulator for Islamic capital market. So I'm involved both in the context of banking as well as capital market, and as well as from the regulatory side as well. So I'll be looking at that. And then moving on Sharia compliant investment to Sharia compliant impact investment, and then applying the Sharia compliant impact investment to Islamic social finance impact measurement and reporting, and with a conclusion on that. See, I mean, I take the latest definition. This is from IFSB. It has not been out yet. This is based on the exposure draft, and I'm not sure whether Dr. Rizky has seen this. But essentially, IFSB will come out on a technical note soon, I believe maybe next year, on the basically the prudential guidelines on Islamic social finance. So when I was in FP, we have a definition of Islamic social finance, which is quite similar to this, but I'm using IFSB just because it is quite recent. So according to IFSB, Islamic social finance refers to all those Sharia compliant financing activities that are undertaken for non-profit and or all societal welfare purposes. That is the underlying intention, you can see from here, is to support charities and social causes. So hence we say that the focus is on non-profit and on all societal welfare, focusing on the society's interest. And at the same time, the focus is looking at more of the social causes for the benefits of the society. And typically, although IFSB did not mention Maqasid al-Sharia, but typically the objective is to fulfill the needs of Maqasid al-Sharia or the objectives of Sharia. So the social finance activities we can break down into two, solidarity instruments, as well as social finance institutions. And the instruments are defined as zakat, sadaqah, infaq, wakaf, and qalbu hasan. And institutions, of course, you have the zakat bodies, like, for example, in Indonesia, we can say that, of course, Basnas is the overall. Then you have this Dompet Duafa and the others. Okay, and then you have the Badan Wakaf in Indonesia, and then you have a similar to the other Wakaf institutions. And then you have qalbu hasan. So if you look at the current context, the discussion on Islamic social finance is that although Islamic social finance being promoted, zakat, wakaf, infaq, particularly, however, there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. Okay, while we want to support zakat institutions by giving zakat, whilst we want to support wakaf, but there are a number of issues that must be addressed both by the regulators as well as those bodies that are, concerned in terms of supervision. I think one of the key things is the issue of trust and transparency. You may give money to zakat institutions, but how do you know that the money that is being paid as zakat are actually being used for the purpose that it's meant for? For example, the breakdown based on the 8 beneficiaries. Okay, so how transparent they are in terms of reporting, that's one. So the issue is about issue of trust and transparency. The other issue is related to the management of funds. How professional are they in management of funds? And this is also again related to both wakaf and zakat. Management fees. For example, when we pay certain amount of money, be it in the context of infaq, sadaqah, or wakaf fund, how much does those organizations take as management fees? Although for wakaf, they can say up to 1/8 because of the Amir component, but the other institutions, we do not know because there's no report. Okay. Next is the issue of regulatory and supervisory framework. We need to have regulations and supervision because currently in many countries, they are the one that regulates and they are also the one that manage zakat, wakaf, and so on. So there must be a clear separation between regulators and operators. Similarly, in the case of supervision framework, we also need to have supervisory framework, including Sharia governance framework for these Islamic social finance institutions. On top of that, we also need to have impact assessment. Although we may give zakat, and zakat is being used to help the poor, wakaf is being used to help for certain objectives, poor and so on, for SMEs, but how do we know whether it is impactful or not? Even in the context of banking now, if you look at banks, I'm talking about commercial banks, as well as development banks, the likes of Islamic development banks and so on, as well as Asian development banks, the issue now is not just how much financing we give to a particular company, how much financing we give to a particular sector, a particular industry. The issue now is what is the impact of those financing? Does it create jobs? Does it help to alleviate poverty? Does it help to improve the health of the population or the beneficiaries, and so on? So we have the important assessment of impact. So in this particular case, what I'm doing is I'll be focusing here in this particular presentation on the impact assessment for Islamic social finance. But just for your information, I'm glad that Indonesia, particularly the Central Bank of Indonesia, Bank Indonesia, is working very hard to develop standards and guidelines for Islamic social finance, the guidelines for wakaf, for zakat. And this is an ongoing effort. And this is very good because at the moment, there is no country that is developing the standards and guidelines for Islamic social finance. So coming back on the issue of impact assessment, what we say is that Islamic social finance, while it is good because the objective is to support individuals, to support SMEs, it must be assessed using impact investment assessment framework, i.e. using indicators and reporting. So in this particular case, let me just explain briefly about impact investment before we go to about the indicators and so on. Impact investment is essentially, the intention is you are not just going to invest. The current approach that we see generally in the market is that, okay, there is investment going to be done in one particular country or in one particular company or several companies. Of course, those objectives are just to generate profit. According to impact investment, and this is where Islamic investment should incorporate as well, is that you are not only going to generate profit, but you're also going to incorporate measurable societal and environmental impact. Okay, so you are looking at both. You're looking at when you invest, you're looking at a financial return, as well as you're looking at returns to the society as well as to the environment. And this is what is meant by impact investment. So impact investors can be generally can be based on three definitional criteria. And this is the typical criteria that is used to determine whether a particular investment fund is impact investment or not. The first is they want to create positive, measurable societal impact through investment. So what I'm saying is that the first objective is you want to invest, you want to make some return, but at the same time, the second component is that you want to create positive, impactful either societal or environmental impact, okay, through the investment. And then the investor should have a commitment to measure social impact, environmental impact through those investments. So those are important areas that should be looked at, okay? So the spectrum of impact investment is from general investment right to philanthropic donation. I will not go into this, but I'm just saying that when we talk about impact investment, we have to consider three important things. To summarize, one is you want to have financial return, a modest financial return. Secondly, you want to have impactful return to the society and to the environment. Okay, so that is in essence what we are talking about as impact investment. Okay, typically, if you study what is happening now in the context of Islamic investment, is that the focus has always been on what we call negative screening. So if you look at Islamic funds, Islamic funds, typically what they do is they look at companies that are non-conventional banking, they are not involved in gambling, they are not involved in tobacco, arms industry. Therefore, these companies are Sharia compliant. However, what we're saying, it is not enough. We have to have positive screening as well. Okay, so Sharia compliant screening today that is being done today in many countries uses negative screening. It excludes companies that are non-Sharia compliant, but it does not incorporate the positive screening component. Positive screening components means that companies that generate positive environmental, social, and governance performance. Okay, so that means that apart from the approach is that you start with negative screening, and then once those companies that meet the negative screening, then you go to the positive screening. Which companies that are Sharia compliant, they adhere to good environmental practices, good social practices, good governance practices. So this is what we meant by positive screening. And for some companies, they go even further, whether those companies integrate ESG, environment, social, and governance parameters in their decision making. Some goes further by looking at thematic. Thematics means that you're looking at just plantation, for example, financial services, or just electronics industries, and so on. So finally, the last one, as we said, social or impact investing, is to look at investments that will try to solve environmental issues, social issues with objective of moderate profit plus impact to those issues that I mentioned earlier, society or environment. Okay. This is just quickly in terms of, if you look at the financial universe, you have Islamic finance investing, you have ethical finance, you have sustainability, you have social responsible finance, and you have impact investing. So impact investing interface Islamic finance, interface social responsible finance, interface with ethical finance. My work, for example, I'm part of the board of trustees of Responsible Finance Institute Foundation. We try to bring together people who are involved in Islamic finance investment, people with ethical finance, people with socially responsible investment, and impact investment. We try to bring those together in order to see, for example, as one of the research work that we are doing now is to see whether if we implement Sharia screening plus socially responsible and impact investment, whether the return is still comparable to just purely Islamic investment or purely conventional investment. So this is the kind of work that we are doing now to see that. And this kind of work is important because it will facilitate investors, particularly investment managers, to consider investing in Sharia compliant impact investment funds that will be rolled out in the near future. Okay, so to continue further, if you look at the components here, we have the Islamic stocks, as I mentioned earlier on. The overall is the unconstrained portfolio, the conventional portfolio. And in the circle in the middle, you have the Islamic stocks. And then you have the SRI stocks. And Islamic stock is basically interface between all those stocks. Okay. Is there any similarity between Sharia compliant investment and impact investment? Yes, there's a lot of similarities. And in fact, during my time at IFTI, we together with UNDP, based in Turkey, we developed a paper on Sharia compliant investment and impact investment. So this is based on the paper that we produced together. So if you see the similarities that both impact investment and Sharia compliant investment, it is value-based investment, which means that it is not just purely investment, but it is based on values. And in our particular case, we are talking about investment based on Sharia values. It is based on moral. And of course, those discussion on moral was discussed extensively by Professor Mehmet just now. It talks also about access to finance because you want to bring more people in the financial sector, what we call access to financial sector, the financial inclusion. And when we talk about financial inclusion here, we are not talking about purely from getting people having banking accounts, but using those accounts for the purpose of their business as well as personal transactions. Fourth one is that it's a promotion of well-being. Both seek to promote the well-being of mankind. Because here, as we mentioned earlier on, we should not be looking purely at profit, but we should be looking at what is the benefit to the community, to the society, to the environment. And finally, relationship between business and society. So both impact investment and Islamic finance investment share broader understanding of relationship between business and society. So we are talking about the importance of having that relationship based on moral values. Okay. So in a nutshell, if you compare Sharia compliant impact investors with impact investors, it is transformation from compliance to impact. So we are no longer talking about it is Sharia compliant. We're talking about it is Sharia compliant plus impact. Okay, not only is our investment Sharia compliant, it is also impactful. It is an expansion of the reach of Islamic finance. So Islamic finance is becoming very broad now. It is also a global recognition that Islamic finance considers the impact to community, to society. And the earlier speaker, Professor Mehmet, talked about the criticisms towards Islamic finance, which is well known, and some of you know this very well. So having Sharia compliant impact investment will enable to allay some of those issues. And finally, expansion of benefit towards needy. And for the conventional impact investors, which is quite similar, expansion of sources of finance, development of new markets, enlargement of impact investing tools, and asset-backed nature of Islamic finance. Okay, so in a nutshell, when we want to move from Sharia compliant investment to Sharia compliant impact investment, essentially what we're saying is that we need to utilize both negative as well as positive screening. For your information, in my other position, where I am a member of the Sharia committee at the Securities Commission Malaysia, we are now developing a what we call ESG-based Sharia compliant screening parameters. And these ESG-based screening parameters are based on Maqasid al-Sharia. So typically, if you are familiar with the screening criteria, you have even in Indonesia, you have in Malaysia, you have Dow Jones, FTSE, and so on. They tend to use only negative screening criteria. Negative screening means that companies that are not against Sharia compliant, that not against Sharia, then they are included in this list. So what we're trying to do in Malaysia right now is to incorporate both negative and positive screening, and to incorporate the impact indicators, impact assessment in those criteria. Okay, and the work is still in progress, and possibly next year it may be completed and then launched. So what I'm saying here is, in this particular context, is that when we want to learn from Sharia compliant investment to Sharia compliant impact investment, and subsequently apply it to the context of Islamic social finance, we need to, one, consider both negative and positive screening to create positive impact. And to do that, we have to incorporate the outcomes of Sharia, i.e., to minimize harm, to maximize benefit both to individual and society. And when we say society, it includes environment as well. So the main maqasid, as all of us are familiar, we talk about protection of religion, life, family, intellect, and wealth. And we do have the sub-objective of wealth that includes justice, wealth creation, preservation, and wealth speculation. Okay, so how do we do that? Of course, we need to focus on the positive impact. We need to minimize harm. And that is the main objective of maqasid, minimizing harm and then promotion of benefit. So we need to create necessary benefit to society, and how? Through actively promoting the maqasid al-Sharia. Okay, so the impact assessment, as we said, when we talk about Islamic social finance, we need to develop maqasid al-Sharia based parameters. At the moment, I do not see this. I see in many countries, we are now developing, even blockchain or application, not blockchain, but applications, digital applications to collect zakat, and as well as to collect wakaf, and subsequently we distribute those to the beneficiaries in the case of zakat or wakaf. However, we have yet to see any impact assessment on those Islamic finance, social finance instruments. And I believe those impact assessment should incorporate the Maqasid al-Sharia. Just for your information, in Malaysia, Central Bank Malaysia, the Bank Negara Malaysia, introduced way back in late 2017, early 2018, value-based intermediation. This is for banking and takaful. The objective of the central bank is to shift Islamic banking businesses that is purely based on profit towards based on Maqasid al-Sharia principles. So we see now Islamic banks are incorporating the Maqasid al-Sharia principles in their decision making. And I can say this in the context of my involvement, because I'm also a Sharia committee member at a bank in Malaysia, at two banks in Malaysia, one a development bank, the other one a commercial bank, and the third one I'm involved as a Sharia committee member in a takaful company in Malaysia. So our monthly deliberations, we will always take into account the component of value-based intermediation, the component of Maqasid al-Sharia in our decision making. You see, so at the end of the day, the banks would like to see how Maqasid al-Sharia can be incorporated and implemented in their operations. Of course, this is easier said than done. We can discuss, generally, but to implement, we need to have a detailed outline and plan and programs. For example, a simple one that I've seen in Malaysia is to promote environment. A bank as well as takaful companies would provide certain incentives. For example, in the case if you get financing to purchase an electric car, then your financing rate will be slightly lower. Similarly, if you take a takaful protection or takaful coverage for your car, electric car, then the rate that you pay would be slightly lesser than a typical petrol-based car. So this is some of the examples that banks are doing, and they're working now on detailed implementation of incorporating the Maqasid al-Sharia principles inside their decision making. And bear in mind, to do that, it is quite rigorous because you have to incorporate risk assessment, you have to incorporate credit assessment, as well as getting support, not only from the management of the bank, but also support from the shareholders of the bank. Okay, and takaful companies. Okay, so this is some guidelines in terms of how impact assessment and impact measurement is being developed. What I'm not going to discuss in detail, but what I'm saying is that there is a lot of opportunity for young researchers and not so old researchers, because I am already in Malaysia classified as senior citizen. But for most of you, you are still young and not so young for some of you. I think we need to develop the impact assessment for Islamic social finance. Currently, we do not have that. So we need to develop that, and that could be a number of areas of research, that can be done by researchers. And those research are not only in the context of academic research, but it also has a lot of applications, both for the industry as well as for the regulators. So you see, for example, when we talk about research, we have purely the theoretical research, we have the applied research, and we have the policy research. So I see this is somewhere between the industry, applied research, and policy research. So individuals who are keen can work on the impact assessment for Islamic social finance, and those impact assessment can then be implemented in an organization at the regulatory level as well as at the international level. Okay, so to do that, you need to have basically 4 steps. You need to develop, you need to, of course, implement it, you need to assess, and you need to review. So for each of these, you need to set the goals for the assessment, you need to develop the framework and select the metrics for this, you need to collect and store data, validate data, analyze data, and finally to report and then make investment or make decision based on data driven. Okay, so finally, what I will end up is giving you some simple example. This is still a work in progress, but I'm also with some of the members here trying to develop the impact assessment for Islamic social finance. Okay, and we are trying to use it at the digital platform level. So this is an example. When we talk about water, water is very important. If you use zakat, for example, to build, to to dig wells for the poor. Okay, so there are indicators that you need to look at. One is, of course, just purely the output, the volume of water being used, the percentage of water being recycled, but you need to develop what is the impact. It's not just the output, but also the impact to the community. Okay, so this requires more thinking and a discussion between different stakeholders, discussion between those economists, the social workers, including the Sharia experts, working together to develop those indicators. And those indicators at the end of the day will actually see, yes, we can conclude that, yes, Islamic social finance brings great impact to the society, to the community. It is able, for example, to alleviate poverty. And these are the reasons why, these are the impacts. Okay, so finally, to conclude, Islamic social finance instruments, zakat, wakaf, infak, sadaqah, and qardul hasan, are used to address social needs of the community. And this is not only today, but also historically. And we need to learn from impact investment because it has important lessons for us, particularly in the context of impact investment criteria. And there is a need, as I mentioned earlier, to use impact measurement and reporting in Islamic social finance. We cannot just be based on trust. We give money to certain organizations and we are thinking that they are right-minded individuals who will do the right thing. Trust is important, reporting is important, impact assessment is also very important. So we need to do that. Okay, so, and these are potential research areas that researchers can do, both young and not so young researchers. So with that, I thank you very much, the organizer, and I hand over the session to the moderator. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And let me end the, how do I end this one? Okay, now.
Okay, thank you, Professor Azmi Omar. And this is the discussion time. So there are so many questions come to my setting privately. And Professor Mehmet, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the first question is for Professor Mehmet. It is from our student. He asked about capitalization. So you said that Islamic economic system is apart from capitalization, but capitalism, but capitalism on the right path. What do you think about that, sir? And where is the fundamental difference between Islamic financial system and conventional system based on capitalism economic system as a part of capitalism?
I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but I didn't agree and would never agree that Islamic economics is part of capitalism. These are two different systems. And therefore, I try to identify that there are different political economies, capitalist political economy, socialist political economy, and Islamic political economy. The main distinction would be the way they would define what modes of productions are. In other words, how they bring the factors of production together. Capitalism would essentialize capital, and around capital, they would create a dominant structure, and they return to every other factors of production would be determined according to capital. However, socialism would do the similar things, but through labor. So it's a labor-dominated model. However, in Islamic political economy, in the modes of production, there cannot be any domination because Tawheed does not allow any domination between different stakeholders. All the factors of production would be considered equally contributing to modes of production, and each one of them would enter the production process independently with their particular return. So that's the modes of production. it is different for each political economy. In terms of the value theory, in the capitalist value theory, the value of whatever produced is determined by the amount of capital goes into. In the socialist economy, it will be determined by the labor value. Although within the Islamic tradition and historically as well, there are certain scholars, including Ibn Khaldun, who consider that within Islam as well, the value is determined by labor. But by looking at the Islamic ontological form, what I see, rather than a domination of one factors of production determining the value of whatever it is produced, it is the contribution of each. And also what is important as a distinctive form of Islamic modes of production, it is not only limited with capital and labor, but it is extended stakeholders. So whatever created by Allah would be considered as part of the stakeholding. And therefore society is entirely considered an important stakeholding in the Islamic production function as part of the modes of production. And that is because all the resources are created by Allah and it is given as a free accessibility for everyone. But however, with the private property and private production, people are excluded from having benefit from those resources. And therefore zakat directly determined by Allah to go into the, to be considered as part of the modes of production, rather than zakat being ex post production. It is not after the production, but it is considered as part of the production process. And then the distribution theory would tell us as the third part, modes of production, the value theory, and the distribution theory would determine who is going to get what out of it. In the capitalism, the dominance because of the capital. So the surplus, the value, so the surplus created will be taken by a capital owner. However, in socialism, because there is no capital, private capital, it is communal capital, and therefore labor will get the surplus value, whatever value created, it will go to the labor. However, in Islam, it is considered everyone will get their independent rights from whatever it is produced. And so therefore there is huge distinction. In my presentation, I try to highlight those distinctions. If it didn't go through well, I'm sorry, but there is, these are three different political economies, and Islamic political economy is entirely different. And so the distinction between Islamic finance and conventional finance, as I mentioned again, what we have is convergence between Islamic finance and conventional finance because of the institutional logic. The institutional logic of Islamic banking comes from conventional commercial banking, and therefore it is based on capital domination as well as shareholders' value maximization. And Islamic banking very much use the same institutional logic. However, it uses Islamic business model as financing model. That creates a difficulty because whatever the models that we have around us, such as Mudaraba, Musharaka, and etc., they are business models and they are not financial models. So we are squeezing those business models into banking structure and logic, and therefore we face all those difficulties that we are facing currently. Because Islamic banking has to fit into the existing logic. So the existing logic is the main problem that remain in front of us, and therefore we have to see what alternative forms that can be developed. Professor Azmi Omar gone through the Islamic social finance. That's an important dynamics of the civil society in the Muslim world throughout the history. So that's an important source for development, but importantly as well, in the presentation, what we have seen, the positive screening. Islamic finance so far focused on instrumentalization of Islamic rules, such as riba prohibition in a negative screening manner, but they have not come to, until recently, to a level of considering positive screening. As we understood from Professor Azmi Omar, that there are certain attempts to consider positive screening, at least curbed the excesses of Islamic finance to become more acceptable. However, I still insist on the institutional logic nature of Islamic finance. We have to move on as well. In the third stage of emergence of Islamic finance, we should consider developing new innovative structures. And I'm hoping that all the students here who have keen interest on Islamic finance would be able to work in such projects to develop new structures and new institutional forms rather than confining ourselves to the existing forms. I hope that explains. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. So, Khalid, Islamic financial system is different with capitalism system. So that's the point that we have to understand the fundamental meaning, because the both of Islamic financial system is different. So maybe you misunderstood about the graph that Professor saw. Yeah, about the show about the comparison or the difference between capitalism. So in Islam, we believe that how then we try to removing a barrier so that everyone can access and attempt through the expansion, that's justice. So and the next question, Professor Mehmet. From IAI Taskia, Ms. Riz, her question is about Professor, from your graph entitled Islamic Finance, you mentioned that in the there are three biggest in Indonesia: real estate, banking, and consumer goods. In your opinion or your point of view and experience, how about other sector like agriculture or another sector which is in Indonesia? You know that agriculture also have a big impact on economic. Thank you, Professor, please.
I think, again, because I rushed, the message did not go through in my presentation, such as in the Indonesian case or in other cases. My lamenting, my criticism is that Islamic finance has focused on sectors which are not necessarily in the long run value adding, such as the consumer durables, banking and finance, and real estate. And we know that when there's a financial and economic crisis, the bubbles are always from the banking, finance, and the real estate sectors. And looking at Islamic finance, Islamic banking in most of the part of the world, focusing on these sectors, including consumer durables, is rather worrying in terms of the impact that it can create, but the difficulty when the business cycle goes down. Unfortunately, the first thing would be these sectors. And therefore, when we look at the distribution to other sectors, such as Indonesia needs job creation. And job creation is very much in the manufacturing sector, agricultural sector, service sectors, and etc. When we look at, however, the large share, the lion's share of financing from Islamic banks in Indonesia goes to real estate, banking and finance sector, and the consumer durables. However, manufacturing sector, agricultural and trade sectors get much lesser amount of, or the percentage of financing from Islamic banks. So therefore, when I refer to institutional logic of capitalism and unfortunately Islamic finance following that, this is what I have been referring. In other words, the other sectors which has more value added in the economy, because the conference topic as well, contribution to economy. So in order to get the Islamic bank and the financial institution contributing more to economy, we have to consider how, therefore, we can channel financing from Islamic banks to manufacturing, to agriculture, trade sectors, rather than just focusing on banking and finance, real estate, and consumer durables. The same thing when we look at the graphs, we can see the similar things happening in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia, and in other countries. in Malaysia, it seems that the lion's share again goes to banking and finance and consumer durables. But in recent years, somehow agriculture-based financing, it seems that has increased in Malaysia. That's a positive development. But when we look at, for instance, Saudi Arabia, it's heavily consumer durables. Again, when we look at United Arab Emirates, it's mainly consumer durables and banking and finance sector. And therefore, the message is that we have to get Islamic banking to rechannel its objective function of contributing to the economy rather than increasing shareholder return, because institutional logic of banking is based on shareholder maximization. However, we have to shift, therefore, the stakeholding-based understanding, and therefore how the sectors which has important contribution to the economy, such as the agriculture, manufacturing, service sectors, and trade sector, how we can develop products as well as structures within Islamic banking so that such sectors could benefit, because currently such sectors are discriminated due to the particular risk structures that they have. And therefore, Islamic banking has shifted towards only sectors which can bring less risky returns so that they can maximize shareholder value. And therefore, a shift is essential in Islamic banking. And I'm hoping that even if the commercial Islamic banking in its current form continues, hopefully we can come up with alternative forms of institutionalization, innovative ideas, how different ways of financing can be developed within the Islamic normative world, so that the development objective, job creation, for instance, and better distribution of wealth and income can be achieved beyond capital domination. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And this question is for both of you, two speakers, Professor Mehmet and Professor Omar. So the question is about, can you explain further the role of Islamic finance towards sustainable development goals and how Islamic moral economic views this? And the second question for Professor Azmi Omar, how is the integration model between social finance and commercial finance? The integration model.
Okay.
Yeah, can you?
You want me to answer or Prof. Mehmet first?
Yeah, okay. Please.
No, please, Professor Azmi, okay. Go on.
Okay, I mean, how do you integrate Islamic social finance and commercial finance? I think one of the important things that you need to consider is that in the economy, there are different savers. Okay, yeah, you have different savers. There are individuals who are risk averse. There are individuals who are, I would say, risk moderate, and there are individuals who are risk takers. See, the bank is essentially for those who are risk averse and who are risk moderate. So to me, I envision that in the financial system, you would have different institutions to cater to those needs. For example, if we talk about banking, then banking is typically for those individuals who want to save, who do not want their money to be used in risky manner, therefore their deposits will be wiped out. But on the other hand, there are individuals who are interested to have higher return, therefore they are willing to take higher risk. Hence, if you look at the overall economy and in the financial sector, you will need to have different institutions to cater to those needs, to cater to those different needs. For example, in Malaysia, there was an attempt, and it's still ongoing now, and when central bank introduced what we call investment account platform. This investment account platform is for those depositors come investors who are interested to have higher risk. So what the central bank did is they encouraged setting up a platform, a digital platform, and those risky investments are placed in that platform. And individuals are then invited to participate either as a mudarabah investment and typically it's a mudarabah investment. So you put your money in mudarabah investment, and of course, if the project is successful, then you will get a return. And if the project is not successful, then you will not get any money, or you get only partially. And this is off balance sheet. So this is not part of the banking capital structure. And so banks are not worried because they will continue to do the normal business. But at the same time, for project which is risky but higher return, they can park this project into this investment account platform and get investors to come on board. From the experience thus far, and what I have seen is that it is not that successful for the simple reasons bank depositors do not want to put their money into risky investments. They just want to put money in a safe place where they can withdraw as and when they like it. There are, of course, demand for that kind of investment platform under Mudarabah from different savers camp investors, but it is not that great. You know why? For example, in the case of bank, if the banks were to use Mudarabah or Musyarakah financing mechanism, it would impact their capital structure. And of course, we can say that in order to minimize that, we need to look at the regulatory structure, regulatory requirements and modify that. But again, you have to go back to the depositors. Are depositors interested to have their money into risky ventures? As I said, again, at the end of the day, it depends on the risk appetite of depositors or investors. For example, I could say for me, being a retiree person, I mean above 60, I am more concerned about having my money in a safe, secure place so that when I finish my contract, I have the money that I can use for my own retirement. So as you can see, I do not want to put my money into Mudarabah because it's very risky to me. I would like to put my money into risk-free or less risky investment. So again, at the end of the day, that would depend on the kind of investors that we have. So my argument is that in an Islamic financial system, we need to have different kind of institutions to cater for different needs. Islamic banking would be catering for people who are more risk averse, who wants to save the money, but we can create institutions that are dedicated for more risky ventures, and you attract different kind of depositors come investors. And they do not need to fill in the capital requirements as a commercial bank needs to. So similarly, in the context of Islamic social finance, we need to have Islamic social finance institutions that will cater for that. They will have, of course, the investment objective, the profit objective, but at the same time, they have their social impact objective as well. So to me, I envisage an Islamic economy and Islamic financial system to have different institutions meeting different needs of society and meeting different risk appetites of society. Bear in mind when we talk about implementing, for example, risky ventures, it is not easy. My experience in implementing value-based intermediation in Malaysia, board members may not agree with that kind of thing. So you need to educate board members as well. That the board members must agree that the bank or financial institution must incorporate societal objective, community objective, environmental objective in their decision making. So you need to engage with the board members. And sometimes in banks, board members are not the ultimate decision makers. The ultimate decision makers are the actual shareholders of the bank, because individual board members are just representing the ultimate shareholders. So you need to get the ultimate shareholders to agree before you can implement all these ESG or the social impact indicators within your financial institution. So I think those are the challenges, and those challenges we need to address. We need to engage and educate board members in implementing this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think two things that I have to identify in responding to this question, initial part of the question. The first, by definition of the Islamic institutional logic, sustainability is essential part of the Rububiyyah and the Tazkiyah concept, as well as a consequence of Tazkiyah. Because we consider everything that we have around us as a privilege. And that privilege is important for us to consider as an extension of or essentialization of sustainability within this Islamic political economy. However, the current SDGs debate, Sustainable Development Goals debate, I consider is important in the sense of correcting the failure of market system, such as correcting for poverty, correcting for environmental issues, financial inclusion, and etc., gender biases, and etc. However, having said that, and unfortunately and positively, it will be a positive contribution for Islamic banks and financial institutions, because over the years, when we have been discussing the ethical turn for Islamic finance, the Islamic banks and financial institutions have not been forthcoming. But with the SDGs now, most of the countries in the world, including Muslim countries, have become party to SDGs at the United Nations level, which would imply that Muslim countries have to respond to the SDGs. And as a consequence of that, institutions within each Muslim country has to respond and develop necessary structures to respond to certain aspects of SDGs. And therefore, Islamic finance will learn from that process to be ethical, despite the fact that by definition, they have to be ethical. But unfortunately, because of the institutional logic, it has not been able to achieve that. But since the conventional markets are forcing, Islamic finance will learn, because Islamic finance is a mimicking process. It is always mimicking the institutions. So if the market goes into SDGs, sustainability, Islamic finance will follow that in order to be competitive in the market. So therefore, it's a positive turn for Islamic finance to learn how to be ethical beyond the prohibition, the negative screening, as Professor Azmi has identified. But of course, my major criticism to SDGs, on the one hand, is a positive emergence in responding to the failures of market system and correcting the failures of market system. On the other hand, it does not directly tackle the question from the modes of production, from the heart of the issue, because it's still the model that we have around us still is a capital dominated model. However, what we are doing, the outcomes of this model has been modified, has been moderated through SDGs. In other words, we have to look into, rather than sticking to the capital dominated model, have more equal distribution of capital can be achieved within a country and between the countries, rather than financial domination, financialization that we have around us. And therefore, we try to tackle the problem at the heart as much as possible. And when that is not happening, then we try to correct it. However, SDGs are very positive indeed, I fully support, but at the same time, it has to tackle, we have to develop necessary structures to respond to the problem at the heart, this production function based on capital domination and taking the surplus, entire surplus to capital, that has to be changed as well. In other words, we have to first prevent the companies to pollute environment, and we have to invest into that. We have to invest in production structures and technologies. And then if there is still environmental problem, then we can tackle it. That will be the radical solution to the problem to prevent such as environmental problem or pollution or poverty and etc. can be tackled. But the current policy making is not dealing with the elephant in the room. However, just looking at how the consequences can be moderated. So therefore, this is a soft response to the problems that we have in front of us. But having said that, having my critical political economic position, I consider SDGs as a positive turn, and it is pity that Islamic finance has to learn ethicality from SDGs rather than looking into its own norms and the value system. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mehmet, for the answer, and Professor Omar. This is the last questions for Professor Omar from Firmansyah. So currently our Islamic Bank is in the midst of incorporating ESGs and SDGs framework into our Islamic commercial and social finance and its policy, products and services levels such as SLL financing, green mortgages, sustainability-linked wakaf saving product, and electric vehicles financing product. Moreover, the ESG and positive screening is already compulsory since beginning of this month for wholesale corporate banking segment level. Would you please to advise us regarding to the working field level, especially in Indonesia, because we have the Financial Services Authority or OJK has not had its operational or technical guidelines regarding to this matter, even though they already produce a POJK 51 at sustainable finance policy. So we usually citing from APLMA standard or Sustainalytics or VBI. Professor Omar, can you?
Okay. I've just, thank you very much, moderator. I've just responded to Brother Firmansyah privately that because it would take a long time to explain and discuss, I would take offline with him, given that now it's also close to 6 o'clock and I have yet to pray Asar. And Maghrib here is quite close, before 7 in Malaysia time. So, I mean, I would take offline with him and then we can discuss it. Because that requires more discussion, more elaboration.
Okay, thank you, Professor Azmi Omar. So, Brother Firmansyah, your question will be saved and I will send to Professor Azmi Omar and we'll discuss later. Since our time is past 48 p.m. on my laptop time, I will give the conclusion. I mean, it's a highlight from our two speakers because the presentation is very insightful and very informative. I also never hear and ever hear about Islamic moral economy. So Professor Mehmet, it is new for me. Thank you very much. And Professor Omar, thank you very much for sharing us about impact investment to Islamic social finance. This is very interesting. I hope as a lecturer, as students, in the future we can do more research about these two topics because this is very interesting topic, so that we can contribute to increase our role of Islamic finance in Indonesia. So I will give this time to Master of Ceremonial Anida. Please take over this event. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Anida, are you with us? Please quickly, because we have to time for Salat. Anida, can you hear me? Yeah.
Will you hear me?
Yeah, clearly. So please take over this event.
Okay, brother and sister, we will go into the closing ceremony. Please be seated. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants, brother and sister. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome once again to the first International Conference of Islamic Economic, Finance and Social Finance, presented by Faculty of Islamic Economic and Business IAIN Padang Sidimpuan 2020. It's very nice to see all of you once again, and we hope you have been enjoying yourself at the conference so far. We are very honored to have with us here in this afternoon Director of IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, Professor Dr. Haji Ibrahim Siregar MCL, the Dean of Faculty of Islamic Economic and Business IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, Dr. Darwis Harahap MSI, the Dean of Others Faculty IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, Dr. Irfan Shauki Beg as the Director of Business Distribution and Utilization Department that have joined with us before, and Professor Mehmet Asutai BA MSc, MA PhD from Durham University of United Kingdom, Professor Dr. Muhammad Azmi Omar as the President and CEO in SIF Malaysia, and also presenter and participants of the first International Conference of Islamic Economic Finance and Social Finance 2020. Excellencies, participants, brother and sister, we have had productive and inspiring time together, and this even about to come to very end. I hope you have found the presentation on this conference are informative and helpful. Now we will announce awards for the best presentation from the each room. And well, brother and sister, the best presentation awards from this conference goes to Miss Utari Evi Cahyani and teams from IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, entitled The Islamic Wealth Management During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And the second, presented by Nurhuda Abdullah and teams from IAEA Tazkiyah, entitled Analysis of Implementation of Sharia Insurance for the Agriculture Sector. And the last, presented by Miti Yarmunida and team from IAIN Bengkulu, entitled Halal Production at the Meatball Home Industry in Bengkulu City. Well, give applause for the winner, and please to receive the award certificate later, not for this time. I'm so sorry. And for another, we'll review the paper again, and we will make it into the book chapter. And for the best paper, we will publish it in the integrated journal. Now we will launch the conference. From my deepest heart, I would like to invite the Rector of IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, Professor Dr. Ibrahim Siregar MCL, to present us with the closing speech and ceremony. Professor Ibrahim, time is yours. Professor Ibrahim, could you hear me?
Moderator.
Yes, sir.
I think Rector is praying Asar, yeah? Or has another job maybe.
Sister Anida, you are still mute.
Okay.
So maybe our dean can give a closing statement.
Okay.
Okay. Because our rector hasn't stayed with us, I'm so sorry because I haven't to call him before. For the Dean of FEBI IAIN Padang Sidimpuan, Dr. Darwis Haraf MSI, to give us the closing statement. Dr. Darwis, the time is yours.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa syukurillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, ma ba'du. The first, I say thanks to our prominent lecturers, Prof. Mehmet Asute, BA, MSc, from Durham University, and Prof. Datu Azmi Omar, President and CEO in SIP Malaysia. For enlightenment to us, I hope this not the first, the last join with us. As Rector say, that in the next maybe we hope COVID-19 will go away and you can come to our campus to give the present, to make a conference again. Maybe to hear my speech, let's close our conference by saying Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Professor Mehmet. Thank you, Professor Omar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mehmet, Prof. Azmi.
Thank you. We can take a photo, take a picture.
I agree with it. For all participants, I hope you turn on your camera and we will take the photo. And please give your warm smiling, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I will get the screenshot for the first screen. 1, 2, 3, smile.
Yes.
Wait a moment. For the second screen, give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and the third screen. Oh my God, if I look, your smiling is so enthusiastic and don't want to end our event today. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Alhamdulillah, thanks for your attention. Okay, thanks for the Dr. Darwis, for all our keynote speakers today. And brother and sister, now I will leave you with a quote from Ali bin Abi Talib, a Sahabat Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who once said, whoever depart to gain knowledge, to practice knowledge, certainly the slightest knowledge will be of benefit to him. Let us be guided by all the things we have learned and heard throughout the conference to be able to see the influence on our future. Thank you, and thank you very much. And before we part, please accept this verse from us. Kalau ada jarum yang patah, jangan disimpan dalam peti. Kalau ada silap dan salah, harap dimaafkanlah salah kami. Which roughly means, please forgive us for our shortcomings till we meet again, perhaps in the next conference and at the second International Conference of Islamic Economic, Finance and Social Finance 2021. Maybe, and inshallah, Allah will be headed. May all of you have a safe journey to your home. May Allah give us the blessing and mercy. I'm so sorry for all the mistakes probably I make and the community make. Once again, thanks for your attention. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Thank
wabarakatuh.
you, Umar.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thanks for
Thank you, Mr. Rifki, for having us.
Thank you.
And Professor Omar with us.
Thank you as well. Hope it is
Thank you very
beneficial
much.
for you.
Hoping to see you again.
Inshallah. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ya, Pak Dekan ditunggu di Bengkulu ya, Pak ya.
Iya.
Makasih, Feby.
Baksonya jangan apa dulu dihabisin ya. Tentang halal bakso. Jadi yang menarik itu baksonya.
Siap, siap.
Salam sama Bu Asna ini.
Bukan pes kagak ada ini. Tulisan ini dah.